Joe Manchin has really been asking for it this year, effectively saying, Joe Biden's not president, I'm president. I'll decide what you get to do and more importantly, what you don't, which is basically everything. And despite this, he hasn't really faced that much public criticism. It started a little bit this week. You had representatives like Jamal Bowman and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez pointing out the obvious influence that his corporate donors and his desire for donations has had on him. People have cited his past statements about the filibuster, where he seemed much more open to reform. Well, now people have been doing more digging and surfacing more information about the groups that have recently been trying to pressure him, as well as those who've been providing donations. So we're gonna run through several of those, including Americans for Prosperity, a group backed by billionaire Republican donor Charles Koch, not generally thought of as a big supporter of the Democratic Party, but he's explicitly targeted Manchin in its pressure campaign, the Americans for Prosperity, to defeat the legislation. This is the For the People Act, even though their own data shows that provisions cracking down on dark money are highly popular, including among Republican voters. You can find online messages back and forth between them, recorded conversations where they talk about how difficult it is to craft a narrative that would get Republicans to oppose many of the provisions of the For the People Act. That did not cause them to do a bit of soul searching about why conservatives are so supportive of it. They're just going to try to get it killed without ever actually convincing people that it needs to be. You also have Heritage Action. This is the advocacy arm of the Koch-backed Heritage Foundation, which organized a rally earlier this year to pressure Manchin to oppose the bill. Heritage Action has also partnered with the American Legislative Exchange Council to craft model voting restriction laws for Republican state legislators. And so I believe we have a Heritage Action organizer on video. This was obtained by Mother Jones, talking about one of these recent sorts of bills in Georgia.
Iowa was the first state that we got to work in, and we did it quickly and we did it quietly. Honestly, nobody noticed. At the end of the day, the bill that Governor Kemp signed and the Georgia legislature marshaled through had 8 key provisions that Heritage recommended. We're working with these state legislators to make sure they have all of the information they need to draft the bills. In some cases, we actually draft them for them, or we have a sentinel on our behalf give them the model legislation. So it has that grassroots, from the bottom up type of vibe.
Yeah, that's what we need in America, is we need a grassroots vibe, not grassroots action. We need vibe. We need some billionaires to hand legislation for Republicans to just sign off on. And that's apparently what they've been doing. And nobody even noticed.
Yeah, so there's so many parts of this that I love and hate. So that video couldn't have been any better. Sometimes the Sentinel will hand it to them just because we weren't creepy enough. And it'll seem grassrootsy. Or like, look guys, you get what John is saying obviously, right? So they have no grassroots. These are giant corporate machines and they fund these think tanks and these organizations. They then funnel the bribes, campaign contributions to the politicians like Joe Manchin. And they call that the under the dome strategy, meaning we have lost any chance of winning in a democracy, so we have to go to under the dome of the Capitol where we rule, where we have all of our corrupt senators, both Republicans and Democrats, to work for us, so we don't need the grassroots. Now, that's obvious. Pause to think about, wait, if the overwhelming majority of Republicans also want some of these bills, including $15 minimum wage, which huge majorities in West Virginia in particular want. By the way, a majority of the people in West Virginia, which went heavily for Trump, also want to get rid of the filibuster, interesting. And 79% want the For the People Act that would actually clean up our democracy and our elections. Now, it's not surprising actually, Republicans also want to clean up the elections because a lot of them genuinely think that there was something wrong in 2020, right? So they go, oh, well, this bill addresses anything that might go wrong, and it gets more people to vote. And Republican voters think that there's more on their side, so they're like, what's wrong with more people voting? Let's do it, right? But most importantly, it has anti-corruption measures, and Republican voters love anti-corruption measures, and so do Democratic voters. So the interesting note here is, but none of the Republican politicians want what an overwhelming majority of what Republican voters want.
Yeah.
And then now we turn to Manchin, he's a Democrat. And they say, oh, Joe Manchin, he's gotta vote against all these popular provisions because of West Virginia. But wait a minute, that 79% number is from West Virginia. He's voting as 4 out of 5 voters in West Virginia. Why is he doing that? Well, this report shows he's doing it because he's corrupt. It's not at all complicated, and it is not at all a hyperbole. After you voted against $15 minimum wage, both Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema, after she did the swirling vote no and the curtsy and stuff, and he said, oh no, yeah, I had higher wages. That's terrible, terrible for my corporate friends. I'm worried about my constituents. No, your constituents want it, definitely, overwhelmingly, right? You know what he did? They both curtsied over to the National Restaurant Association and collected their bribes. Now they're legalized bribes in America, but they're definitely bribes. They just handed them checks. Good job, little boy, Manchin. Okay, Manchin's tough guy, pushing all progressives around, all Democrats around. He's pushing Joe Biden around. He's open-handed slap, boy. What are you gonna do about it, right? But when he goes to the National Restaurant Association, he's a dog. He's a servant. He's like, I'm here. Where's my check? Where's my check? And then they did. They gave him a check. They gave him lots and lots of checks. So it turned out great for Joe Manchin. That's why the under the dome strategy works, because our politicians are corrupt. Now the idiots in the mainstream media are like, what corporations? I don't know what you're talking about. Corporate donations. And so now, by the way, so this particular story is, he says, the Koch brothers, Heritage Foundation, et cetera, first starts spending money against them in West Virginia. Now remember, corporate Democrats and corporate media says Joe Manchin cannot be pressured. He's a rock, right? They spend a tiny little money. He goes, I'm so sorry. And he does an op-ed with the exact talking points from the Chamber of Commerce. Like almost word for word, saying, the filibuster is dangerous and we need something bipartisan, and I hate the For the People Act and I'm against it, right? Okay, what happens next? Chamber of Commerce just starts sending him checks. Now that's a different group. That's the collection of all the business, all the corporations, right? And they're like, good job, good boy. You wrote it exactly as we told you, dog. Write it again, dog. So who's the actual boss? It's certainly not Joe Biden. And it's not actually Joe.
He's not a good boy.
Yeah, and it's not Joe Manchin. The actual boss is the Chamber of Commerce, the corporate machines. And finally on this, for now at least, look at what happens when you apply public pressure. Now here I get to say I told you. So I asked progressives in Congress, we elected the Just Democrats to be aggressive and not just on theoretical stuff, but yes, even though it's uncomfortable, to call out your so-called colleagues. They call you out all the time. I mean, Ilhan Omar can say the most reasonable thing on planet Earth. Hey, maybe the International Criminal Court should adjudicate the cases in front of them, right? Oh my gosh, she's anti-American. Fellow Democrats pummel her, right? Now, finally, the Just Democrats did do it. Credit where credit is due. Jamal Bowman was the strongest on this, but then AOC also came in and rallied. And those two single-handedly said corporate agenda, started talking about corporate Democrats, and all of a sudden, look at this, the press is covering it. Because that's how public pressure works.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, you took the words right out of my mouth, including all of the impressions of Joe Manchin. I think that people like to believe that because he's in a conservative state, he has to be like this. But as you said, his constituents want things like changes to the filibuster, raising the minimum wage, things like this. They support the For the People Act, and he is so out of step with the wants and the needs of his constituents. It's so obvious that he is not interested in actually governing or supporting their actual needs. He's interested in cashing corporate checks. It's so obvious, it's very simple. And it gets so frustrating, the amount of power, the grip that this one person has over our democracy, this person who is very clearly not interested in governing in any meaningful way.
Exactly. Yeah, and especially that he's wielding the influence over something like the For the People Act, which a very similar bill he co-sponsored just 2 years ago. It's desperately needed considering the bills that have been passing. On the Damage Report, Bridget and I talked today about how many have already passed and hundreds more are pending. The issue is that what I love about this story is that it combines both forms of the assault on American democracy. You have the renewed efforts to suppress the vote as much as possible and to set up, stealing of election later and that sort of thing. And then you also have Joe Manchin, who's being influenced in the old school way. Like hypothetically in West Virginia, you might have been able to vote to get a senator, but you don't get a senator who cares about your vote. You get a senator who cares about his donations. And all that's totally legal. They don't need to change any laws to get that sort of influence over democracy. They just write out a check, and they get it anytime they want.
Yeah, so one more thing. top 3 donors in American politics that we can see with the naked eye, not the dark money guys, are number 3 is the drug companies. Number 1 is the National Association of Realtors. And if you're wondering why you have all the shady housing stories, it's because the National Association of Realtors are buying our politicians in mass, let alone the banks. But number 2 is the Chamber of Commerce. They gave $80 million last year. Now, 2 things about that. 1, that's actually the tip of the iceberg. They give a lot more in dark money. And so what you're seeing publicly and what they give to Joe Manchin is basically an appetizer. Okay, good boy, and the reason they do it publicly, even though they can and do funnel much more money in dark money to them secretly. And we're not even allowed to see it because Joe Manchin won't allow anti-corruption measures so that we can see them, right? And in fact, that's in the For the People Act. That's why he hates it. And that's why I told you from day 1, there is 0% chance that guys like Joe Manchin would vote for that. By the way, it's not just him. There's at least 10 other corporate Democrats, according to Washington Post, that are hiding behind Manchin. Go, don't let him see our donors. Don't let him see our donors. That's in the For the People Act, and it would disclose their dark money donors, and that's the last thing they want. Because then you see the whole iceberg of how deeply, deeply corrupt Joe Manchin and other corrupt corporate Democrats are, let alone the entirety of all of the Republican senators. But even the 80 million, that's the tip of the iceberg. You think the giant multinational corporations are giving $80 million to American politicians for what? Charity?
They like their style.
Like, it really, does anybody think like, well, they gave a little bit of cancer and a little bit to heart disease, and then they gave some to politicians. Oh, they have no interest in how they're voting. And the politicians who took all those millions of dollars, they were totally unaffected because they're saints. If you think that, you're in luck. You can get a job with any mainstream media outlet. Apply now, and they'll be like, oh great, you're one of like the 7 people in the country who are schmucks enough who think that our politicians are not corrupt. Come on in, there's not enough of you, we'll hire all of you. So mainstream media, where are you? This is a piece by Salon. Right, at least they're progressive, right? And it's good to have other progressives writing about this, etc. Mainstream media, you still haven't figured out corporate donations? You still haven't figured it out? Every reporter, every editor in the country should be fired if they don't understand that corporate donations at a bare minimum have a lot to do with how the Joe Manchins of the world vote and how they act. If they deny that, then they're obviously part of the game. They're not at all interested in challenging power. They're interested in the status quo, because guess what? Hey, look at that, they're also multi-billion-dollar corporations. Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR, so those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.